So, I don't really watch many YouTube movie reviews anymore for a variety of reasons. The main one is I got kind of burned out in the Star Wars hate train at the end of the 2010s, and I also realized that all the time I was putting into watching strangers talk about movies was better spent, actually watching movies. But every now and again, I dip my toes back in, I look for new channels and new voices to connect with, but it's only a matter of time before I encounter one phrase, or variations on that phrase, that just drive me crazy. It goes something like this. A reviewer will be describing something they don't like, and then they'll say some version of, "Why didn't this happen instead?" Now, this is pretty innocuous, especially for nerds like me. If you watch a lot of movies, you start to pick up on narrative patterns, and sometimes you can see pathways that the actual story seems to ignore, or solutions to problems that characters don't bring up. And pointing these out is not wrong or anything, but it also isn't really criticism. It's just writing fan fiction. Because really, as soon as someone goes off about how if a movie had just been written the way they wanted, it would have been good, they're not talking about the movie anymore. And my issue is that presenting these hypotheticals is being conflated with criticism, and in some ways is replacing it. And look, I understand the impulse to do this. I've done it many times in older videos. But looking back, my perspective in moments like those is notable, because when I would say some variation of, "Why didn't that character just do this instead?" it wasn't a real question. It was a way for me to assert a sense of creative superiority over a story that I deemed to be not good enough. And I think that kind of viewpoint reflects the tension between approaching media as a fan and as a critic that has defined YouTube film culture for a long time, pretty much since it began. Because if you ignore the actual process of making a movie, which is extremely complicated and fraught with daily obstacles and compromises that only multiply and get more frustrating the higher your budget gets, then fixing any mistakes you see in one is easy. This goes beyond narrative suggestions, too. I've seen countless videos where people have made insanely baseless statements about directors, writers, actors, producers, or studio heads, and essentially write real-world fanfiction to justify their feelings about why a movie, or the industry at large, is the way it is. And sure, a big chunk of that is just very cynical clickbait, but it's the internet. There's never just one thing going on. And I think it all goes back to that sense of superiority I talked about, that need to prove that you, as the audience, understand storytelling better than people who are being paid millions of dollars to do it. Oh, actually, no, significantly less than millions of dollars to do it. But this perspective keeps a person in opposition to the art they're engaging with, and critics aren't the enemy of art. I know a lot of people think they are because it's much easier to blame some faceless group of people doing a bad thing than, engage with nuance, but I don't think you can approach criticism in good faith with the assumption that you're above the subject, or that you understand it better than the people who made it. And sure, it's fun to poke holes in something dumb, we've all done it, but correcting a story is not a critic's job, because it suggests that a person's own sensibilities are rules that movies are supposed to be playing by. It's very black and white, very right or wrong, but I would argue that movies don't owe us any particular experience. They don't owe us our idea of the correct story, and the assumption that a bad movie is just a few fixes away from being a good movie is fine, but it's a fantasy. You have to meet movies where they are, not where you think they should be. That's also why I don't think the word objectively really has much critical use, because every thought you have about a movie or a TV show or whatever is subjectively tinged by the experience you want from it. But just because you don't get that experience doesn't mean that what you got was broken, It really comes down to one question. Should criticism be based on what a movie is or what it isn't? Because to me, the object of critique should not be correctness, but honesty. And I think a lot of people are resistant to being honest about how art makes them feel because they would rather feel smarter than said art and the people behind it. But that's the thing about making videos about opinions about opinions. None of this really matters. This is not going to change the world or the film industry or maybe even anyone's mind. But I'm not trying to be correct here. I'm not trying to tell you what's right. I'm just trying to be honest. And honestly, if my options are a Marvel movie or a 6-hour video complaining about a Marvel movie filled with imaginary bullshit about how it could have been better, I'm taking the Marvel movie every single time.